Today, my guest is product management expert, product management coach, and public speaker on the topic, Clement Kao. Thank you very much for having you, Clement, today with me.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
A person who has also behind stories with hyper-growing startups regarding product management. This is not the topic that I touch every day, but I think it's extremely crucial for many of my viewers who are startups or VCs. So again, very glad to have such an experienced guest on the topic. And Clement, is it a myth or is it true that there are some archetypical figures in startups history, like Steve Jobs, who used to say that, they do not ask their customers what they want. They just, invent products that people love. And it's just a kind of genius, like any other kind of genius. So is it really a genius? Is it really are such people real people, or is it, let's say, a process and a meticulous coming to what people really want?
Yeah, fantastic question. This is actually something that comes up a lot, even from product managers themselves. Many times they ask, wait, how can I be more like, the geniuses who come up with these amazing products, just kind of almost as if they didn't need to think about it, right? But actually, many times this is actually more of a myth. Even when you think about the people who came up with game-changing products, many times they dove very deeply into understanding what is their customers' pains, right? They worked very much with designers, with engineers, with business people to understand where's the market going. And so something that I want to break a myth on is that being an innovative product genius is not something that you're born with. It is actually something that you can train over time. And I've seen this come to life, even in my previous work as a principal product manager at Blend, which is a fintech startup. We serve banks. And one of the things that we regularly heard from our own customers is, wow, this is completely genius. We'd never have thought of this before. But we were really just using kind of a structured process in terms of understanding what are the pains that they have, and then being able to deliver something that is beyond what they imagined. Right? So really, in terms of thinking about product innovation, it's not so much, hey, I'm going to come up with a category changing type of product. It's more about thinking about different timelines of innovation, right? We can think about, hey, there's like short-term innovation, right? Where we're really looking at what is it that we know about our customers' issues, right? And we can use that to figure out what to build next. We can look at medium-term innovation, where we're trying to understand where our customers going to be, right? Kind of what are the things that we expect them to run into and be able to solve those pains ahead of time. And then there's long-term innovation, where we're partnering with technical partners, with our engineers, et cetera, in terms of looking at, well, what is technically possible? Kind of what are the totally new things that we can do? And using those as kind of skunkworks projects in terms of being able to change things more, 3 to 10 years out into the future. So really, I want to make sure that when we're talking about, product innovation, we focus on, are we talking about like short-term product innovation or medium-term? Because those require very different techniques to be able to deliver that value to customers and to the market.
So this is very important. Let's say time matters. This is something we should underline.
Totally.
Let's start maybe with this. We are at the beginning of our startup journey. What would you advise regarding the product management for the very startup phase of the startup a startup?
Yeah. So when we talk about the very, very, very beginning, right? Kind of before you even have a team, right? Like before you're even sure that you have an idea, but you're really, really excited about making something happen. The most important thing that we need to identify as founders, as product leaders, is we need to be able to find something that we call product market fit. And so product market fit really means when we create some sort of solution, is this something that the market really, really needs and is going to be pulling out from you, right? And the reason why we care about product market fit is when we have product market fit, our customers are eager to come to us, right? When we don't have product market fit, we are trying to push out product, right? We're trying to do a lot of marketing, we're trying to do a lot of sales. We aren't getting that traction, right? So it's really important, especially from like a scalable technology perspective, that we find product market fit. And so in terms of product market fit, again, this is not as mystical as many people make it out to be. It's not something that's like very magical. There are only three components that we need to consider when we think about product market fit. It's really, do we have the right audience, right? So what are the customers that we want to serve? Do we have the right pain? So is this thing that we're trying to solve something that they actually care about? And then do we have the right solution? So is this thing that we're proposing something that our audience thinks is very much going to solve their pain? And so we need to be trying to hit kind of all three of these components when we're thinking about product market fit. I think one of the most difficult things, though, about finding product market fit is that you can't just figure out your customer audience sequentially and then figure out the pain and then figure out the solution. You kind of have to figure out all three at once, right? And so it's really important that we iterate very quickly, right? That we're not trying to write a bunch of code, but instead we're trying to get ideas out there of just these very, very basic, wireframes, these like kind of drawn pen and paper prototypes, and put them in front of customers, right? And say, is this something that you would buy, right? And if they're saying, please, let me give you my credit card information because this would solve a huge pain for me, you know that you've probably got product market fit. If they say, oh, that's interesting, you don't have product market fit yet because they're just trying to be polite. They just don't want to offend you. Right? And so really kind of what we're trying to look for is, are we going after kind of, again, the right set of customers? Are we tackling the right pain? And kind of, do we have the right solution for that? And so one of the things that I actually do here at Product Teacher is I actually teach a class on product market fit in terms of talking through how would founders, entrepreneurs, product managers, et cetera, quickly work through different iterations to be able to find out product market fit before they try to go and do all of this scaling work, like getting press releases, right, or trying to get funding, et cetera. It's all about first getting that product market fit and making sure they have an idea that people actually want, right? Because again, we want to make sure that kind of the most foundational way to think about product management is it's all about, we want to create so much value for our customers that then we can capture that value for our business and for our investors, right? And so to do that, that means that we need to know who are our customers and what do they value, right? Because if we don't know those things, we can't create value for them. So that's why it's so important for us to really dig deep into understanding who are we trying to serve and what are the problems that they face.
Are interviews with customers that important? Because as a former startupper, I was always hesitant about it.
Yeah, fantastic question. So something to keep in mind is that a lot of times people misuse user interviews, right? And so something that I see happen a lot is people try to use user interviews to figure out what feature should I build, right? Kind of when you talk to people, they have a lot of opinions about like, oh, like I'd love to see this feature, right? Or like, oh, like I'm currently using this competitor. And the problem there is that you're trying to solve for each of these individuals in these very divergent ways, right? Kind of you don't actually have like a product that then solves for all of them together. So instead, what you're trying to do is in these user interviews, right? Like the point is not to get their feature list, right? The point is not to understand, who are you competing with? The point is to understand what problem would we be able to solve if we gave them that dream feature, right? And we want to look for who has these different kinds of pains and where do we have kind of a concentration of unsolved pain. Then we use that to then build an initial minimum viable product and then use that. And we want to test for willingness to pay, right? I think something that happens a lot is people might try to ask customers in a user interview, would you pay for this idea, right? And I think the problem of asking people, would they pay, is that they'll usually tell you yes, but then in the real world, they won't, right? And so what you need to do is in user interviews, you want to identify the pains, right? You want to build something that you think will solve the pain, but then you don't want to go back to the user interview. You want to instead create some sort of landing page or some sort of wait list, put it into the market and see if people will engage, right? Because if they give you their credit card information as a pre-order, you know that they're going to pay. And if they don't, then you should go back into the user interview process to figure out, well, why aren't you paying, right? Kind of what are the different things that we don't have yet that would really solve this pain and kind of put out this fire that's in your life, right? So that's really how we should be thinking about user interviews. It's not something that's like super like academic of like, oh, we always have to ask these questions, right? It's really more about trying to understand what is a big pain where they feel like they're going to tear their hair out, right? We want to try to find that pain and then be able to build a solution, but we don't actually build it. we propose it, right? We put up a marketing page to say, hey, would you buy this, right? Kind of here's like, put in your credit card information, we'll tell you about a pre-order. And if you see a lot of traction, then that means you've probably got something that you should be executing against.
Any other tools at this stage?
Yeah, fantastic question. Yeah, so I think something that I think is very underutilized is this concept of like a paper prototype, right? Where basically all you do is you just kind of draw out like what you think the product should be doing and just put it in front of people, right? And instead of telling them, what does this product do? You want to ask them what they think it does, right? And kind of that's very valuable because then you get to see kind of how are people thinking about this problem in the real world? And does your proposed product actually solve that problem? And so the thing that I really like about paper prototypes, right? And instead of having, these very high fidelity mockups, like, let's say like Figma or Balsamiq or whatever, is that way, I think the people that you're talking to, they're a lot more flexible, right? They kind of are thinking more broadly about like, okay, like what are the kinds of prompts that you're trying to solve for me? And on top of that, it's a lot faster to be able to iterate. Kind of you can draw up, a totally different workflow within half a day, maybe even just 2 hours, right? Whereas when you try to go through like, a very nicely polished design spec, that might take, 2 days to an entire week. And you really want to iterate as fast as you can. Like kind of, if you can put kind of these different paper prototypes in front of people and you observe them trying to go through the flow and talk about, okay, I see where this might help me. Okay, actually this thing isn't relevant to me, et cetera, et cetera. By gathering all of these insights, that then helps you actually determine, okay, what solution are we actually building? What is the pain that we're actually trying to solve for? So I think that is something that's very underutilized when it comes to validating or disproving whether we've got the right audience, the right pain, and the right solution.
Yeah, that's very true indeed. When we are moving in our startup journey and we are starting to planning midterm, is it really the time that we should learn something more about product management, maybe get into some books or some methodologies, how to hire the first product people? What is your take on this stage of the startup journey?
Yeah, great question. So I would say that kind of very early on, the founding team should be kind of wearing that product hat, even if they're not actually like formally product managers. And the reason is because you want to be as close to your customer as possible, right? You want to really understand who are the different kinds of people out there and what are the unsolved pains that they have. Right? And so,
sorry for interrupting. Is it?
Go ahead.
It's just interesting to me from your experience. How often are founders product people? Probably not that often.
A lot of them. I would say anywhere between, and it depends on like geography, it depends on industry, but it can range anywhere between like 30% to 70% of like CEOs are like ex-product managers, right? And kind of the reason is because they're sitting at the intersection of what is it that customers need and want and have pains with, and they sit at the intersection of understanding kind of what is the different technologies out there and the different kind of user experiences, as well as deeply understanding kind of how do different business models run, kind of how do we actually go to market, right? And so all of these skill sets are incredibly valuable when you're trying to get a startup off of the ground. Because you're wearing all these different hats as a product manager, you can similarly wear all these different hats as a CEO, right? And so we do see that, many product managers become CEOs kind of as part of their careers. And we also find that many CEOs at startups pivot into companies as product managers, product directors, VPs of product, et cetera. And so that is kind of something that, there's a lot of transition in between where CEOs become PMs and PMs become CEOs for sure.
Yes, but I interrupted. So coming back to the main plot.
Sure. Yeah. So back to the main plot, right? Kind of the question was, when should we start to actually hire a product manager and when is it too early? Generally speaking, I would say that kind of all the way up until you have, let's say, like 6-ish engineers, the founding team should still be like the product team, because again, like you want to be really close to the customer and you want to be able to pivot very quickly. What do we think our company does, right? Kind of what is our mission? What is our vision? How should we be operating? But kind of once you start to pass like the 6 to 10, engineer stage, once you start to pass, more than like 25 to 50 employees, the stuff that you're doing as a founder, you have so many different things going on that it's much harder to be able to stay connected with your customers and to understand what's going on there. And so that's about the time at which you should be bringing in your first product hire. And really kind of the whole point of bringing in a product hire is for them to be able to dig even deeper into, again, who are the different audiences that we care about? What are the different pain points that they've got? And how do we prioritize kind of a winning solution for all of that? So then that the founder can go and tackle kind of all of these different other crucial components of running a startup. And so kind of that handoff point, again, to summarize, is you probably want to start bringing in a product manager once you have, more than 6 to 10 engineers or like more than 25 to 50 employees. But you don't want to hire too early, right? Kind of, you don't want to have like a product manager as, let's say, employee number 4, because a product manager is very multiplicative, right? Kind of they help to align everyone. They help to do kind of all these deep digging. But very early on, you just need to execute, right? And so kind of very early on, kind of before you even have 10 employees, you don't really want someone who's trying to coordinate things. Kind of, it's okay for there to be chaos where we're trying to move super quickly to be able to understand, is our idea actually something that the market really, truly needs and wants? So there's that.
So even if one is a product person, in his, let's say, in his job before he quit and found his startup, shall one even then hire a independent product person apart from herself at some point? What is your opinion?
I think that that's really important, because something that starts to happen, and this is particularly true in like the enterprise product space, in the B2B product space, is that at some point, the CEO or the founder starts to be a lot more focused on sales, right? Kind of starts to try to prove to these really large enterprise accounts, hey, like we have something that can solve your pain. And something that I've seen firsthand is that sometimes what happens is when the CEO is kind of salesman number 1, but they're also in charge of the product, they start to make these trade-offs without really thinking about it, without really like knowing that they're doing so, of, hey, if we just build this one feature, it's going to win this big customer, right? But the problem is that we don't want to just be building all of these assorted features to win accounts. We need to build a solution that will scale across accounts, right? And so
I loved
in
your materials, I loved this statement, not every revenue is good revenue.
Yes, exactly. The thing that we want to avoid doing, right, is especially, again, like B2B, because like I'm like an ex B2B product manager. The thing that's very dangerous is, especially when you're going after enterprise customers, if you give in to each of their requests, you turn into their custom like software development shop, and you're no longer building a scalable product that serves an entire market. And that's dangerous because yes, this one customer, might be very profitable for you, right? Like might give you all the short-term revenue, but now you're locked, right? Kind of now you can't access the rest of the market. And so you put a cap on how large your company can possibly be. You've put a cap on how much revenue you can possibly earn and how much pain you can possibly solve, because you're building all of these things that are super unique to just one customer. And there's no way for you to be able to scale it to work for others, right? And so that's something that we want to be really thoughtful of is, yes, the CEO should be kind of the primary advocate of the product. They should be getting out there, right? And making sure that, customers understand what is this product, why should they buy it, etc. But past a certain point of scale, when the CEO is dictating, hey, build this feature, build that feature, etc., that's when we start to become a custom dev shop, and we're no longer building these scalable solutions that are going to be able to serve people all around the world and serve kind of businesses of very different kinds of segments, etc. So that's something that we want to be watchful of.
It's very often, let's say, in startups, a situation when, the dev team breaks loose. And I've noticed, recruiting to many startups for managerial positions. I've noticed that this is around Series A, when the CEO is too much focused on sales. Probably also on product management, and then the dev team has free hand to choose technology, which doesn't necessarily need to be the most cost effective technology or practice oriented technology, but maybe, let's say, the trendiest at the very moment. And This is a huge trap for startups, and this is where I've seen hundreds of projects stuck at this very point.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, some of them stuck forever. So how to deal with startup culture, dev team as a product person?
Yeah, great question. So I think one of the things to keep in mind, right, is even like very early on, when you are trying to just create like the company in the first place, you definitely want someone who's very like business oriented, right? So someone who very much understands, you know, customers, markets, business models. But you also really want to make sure that you have like a technical leader, right? So someone who understands like what is the technology out there, what are our, how do we scale, kind of how do we think about the future, and of course like understanding like the cost and like robustness, etc. Right? Because without kind of these two leaders, if you only have like the CEO there as like, you know, more business or marketing oriented, yeah, exactly like you said, sometimes kind of the dev team doesn't have the insight to be able to say, okay, well, actually, we should be thinking about future scalability in this way, right? So definitely you want that partnership at very much at the executive level, where you have kind of this, you know, chief technology officer who has an equal say alongside the CEO in terms of where are we taking this product and how exactly are we bringing this product to life. So I'm gonna like just say that part first in terms of like how the product team starts to work with the dev team. So kind of I'm assuming, hey, you know, you've just hired your first product manager in, right? So you've already got a dev team that's, you know, has some sort of cadence with like the founding team, right? Kind of how does all this stuff work? Generally speaking, right, I think something that can happen is many times product managers have kind of all of these previous, you know, templates or processes or best practices, etc. And those are good shortcuts. But the problem is if you just implement them immediately when you join a dev team, you don't really build up that trust, right? Because then they're saying, well, you've never worked with us before, right? And so we don't know why you're doing all of this stuff. And like we do stuff differently, like we're special. Why are you doing all of this? I think it's much more valuable for a product manager to actually, you know, sit down with the dev team for, you know, at least like a couple of weeks and like impose no new processes, right? Just really sit down and kind of observe what's going on and see, okay, well, it looks like we might have some problems here. And like, oh, like it looks like, you know, there are some places where we can help the dev team do even more here. Or hey, like these are places where we're seeing that, you know, customer requests, you know, aren't being thought through as like, what is the pain? And we're just shipping features kind of as customers ask for it, right? And so product manager, right, should be doing, you know, essentially customer interviews or customer research with the dev team to understand how strong are we right now and how can we continue to grow, right? And then sit down with kind of dev leadership and work through, hey, you know, here are some areas that I've identified that like we can continue to improve. Here are the best practices that I've seen before, right? Like here's how I've seen it work at other companies before. Are you willing to try these things out, right? We're not saying that it has to be this way, but like I just want to try these things out for, you know, 1 sprint, 2 sprints, right? Like just give it like a month and see whether our dev team feels like they're a lot more empowered, right? Like they feel like they're closer to the customer. They feel like they better understand what it is that they're doing, right? And so it's really kind of not coming in kind of like full force as this like authority, but more coming in as this, you know, servant leader of trying to understand, okay, we have some dev team, like that is not something that we can change, right? Kind of where are they currently? What is their unsolved pain and how do we help to solve that pain? Start building that trust and propose processes, but get that kind of buy-in and be willing to experiment with it just because every team operates differently and has like a very different culture, right? So that's something that I would say is like very helpful when you're joining in as like a first-time product manager, like the very first PM for an organization, is that many times those engineers may not have worked very closely with a product manager. They might have just worked with the founder. And so it's like a very different dynamic. And so building trust is like the most important thing that you should be doing first before you try to up level their efficiency as well as their ability to drive product thinking. So there's that.
I think that another very important case is how to deal with a founder when you are the higher product manager and you know that the founder is the ultimate kind of product guy in the company. How to solve this case?
Yeah, fantastic question. So exactly, like because the founder has been doing all of these product things for a while, one of the biggest friction points is when that product manager first comes in, right? Kind of the founder is still trying to do the product stuff and they're not like really willing to let go of all of these product components of understanding, you know, who are the different customers, what are the pains, what are the potential solutions, right? And so something that's really helpful, right? Again, this is very much kind of like a trust building exercise, So I'm going to first focus on what should the product manager be doing, and then we can talk about like how founders should be thinking through it. The key thing for a product manager to remember, right, is like the company is the founders, right? And so it doesn't make a lot of sense to come in and say, hey, your idea sucks, right? Like, hey, like you've got entirely the wrong customer and entirely the wrong pain, and entirely the wrong solution, and I'm taking over, right? Because that is a very easy way to create a lot of distrust, right? It's much
which I saw happening, by the way.
It happens, yeah. And so the product manager, their goal is to understand at a high level, right? Be aligned at a high level. What is the company's mission? What is its vision, right? Kind of why did the founder even bother taking this gigantic risk to create a startup, right? Startups are massively risky. And so the founder has some sort of, underlying conviction that like this is a problem that must be solved. Right? And so it's really important for the product manager to understand from the founder's perspective, what are we trying to solve? What is our identity? Why do we care? Right? And that's the most important thing, because once you have that, you can start speaking the founder's language, right? Kind of if you don't have that overall understanding and you start trying to change processes and like, you start trying to change go to market and you start trying to change like, the copy and the tone and like the positioning, etc., you will have a lot of mistrust, right? But once you can speak their language and you can say, hey, you got into this because you're trying to solve this massive inefficiency in some place, or because in the past you were this customer and no one solved it before, right? Once you speak their language, now you can start to position your proposed changes as here's why it will help us do more, and here's how I'm going to make sure that it doesn't break your vision, right? And so by being able to position it both as we can do more of what you want, and here's how I'm going to make sure I'm not going to do stuff that's going to hurt what you want, then product managers build that trust and have a lot more ability to be able to shape where's the product going. So that's what I would say from like the product manager's perspective, is just really making sure that you build kind of that very high level understanding of the founder. But what you don't want to do as a product manager is you don't want to become a project manager, right? You don't want just like the CEO to say, we should build some feature. And then the product manager says, I'm going to go build this feature without like really sitting down and questioning, well, why, right? Kind of, are we sure that this is the right customer segment? Like, what is the market opportunities here? How do we know that this is the highest pain versus this is something that the founder thinks is the highest pain, right? So it's up to the product manager to validate what the founder is saying and to bring new perspectives, right? I think there was actually a recent study done where when we look at, what do founders want from, their first product hires or their product leaders, founders overwhelmingly say, even though I might be frustrated when, my product leader brings me conflicting perspectives, I want them to speak up. They need to speak up because I hired them to speak up. If they're not speaking up, they're not bringing anything to the team, right? Like we hired this product person because they have experience, they have new perspectives. And so you need to speak up and say, hey, I've seen before that these kind of customers, they do this thing, but actually here's the real thing, right? Or, hey, like this pain doesn't seem like it's actual pain. It's actually this pain instead. Or, hey, I've seen when you build this kind of solution, here's where it goes wrong. Let's do this other thing instead, right? Kind of you need to bring that as a product manager. So again, product manager should very much try to converge on like mission and vision, but should be very willing to diverge and provide alternate perspectives when it comes to understanding customer behavior, understanding customer pains, and understanding the different kinds of solutions out there. So there's that, just in terms of like, what should the product manager be bringing? From the founder's perspective, right? The most important thing to remember is as a founder, your time, right? Like your own bandwidth is one of the most precious resources of the entire company, right? And the problem is if you're doing all of this individual contributor
it's generally
work,
the most precious asset we all have.
Yeah, like it's founder time and then it's like cash in the bank, right? It's like really those two are like the core resources. And so if the founder is kind of trying to do like linear work, like, doing all the interviews themselves, or like kind of going through like all of like the UX designs themselves, there's all of this other stuff that they could be doing that like helps to grow the company a lot faster and makes it a lot more stable, right? And so something that's helpful for a founder to just remind themselves as they hire this first product person is, the reason why I'm hiring this person is I am delegating, right? I'm going to outsource basically this part of my responsibilities to someone else. And I can guide them, right? Like I can tell them like, this is the general direction I want it to go, but I need to accept that's not going to be exactly the same as if I did it myself, right? As an example, let's say, right, kind of, you have someone who's sitting at home and, who's very, very much enjoys like cooking for themselves, and they start to run out of time and they don't have a lot of time to cook for themselves. If they go out to a restaurant, right, to save on some of that time, right, the question, should they walk into the kitchen to cook that food themselves? And the answer is absolutely not, right? Like you are outsourcing it to someone else. And so even if they bring you a dish that's like not exactly the way that you would have done it, that's okay. Like you have solved that pain of I don't have time, right? And so that's something that we need to remember is that when our product managers are executing, right, when they execute against the founder's vision, the implementation is going to be a little bit different. But as long as we make sure that they understand this is why we're taking this gigantic risk, like this is my conviction, here's where the company needs to be and why, right? As long as they understand that component, it's okay for the implementation details to be different. And it's okay for your product manager to push back against you and say, here are some alternate perspectives that I think we haven't considered yet and why we might need to do things a little bit differently. So there's that, right? So kind of the founder and the product manager both have to give and take in terms of making sure that they're aligned at the high level, but that they're willing to explore different perspectives and have kind of that tension and conflict at like the implementation level for sure.
Yeah, that's very wise. It's probably not that very easy to implement every time.
Yeah, it's very easy to say and it's very difficult to do. So yeah.
So let's get back just for a while to the methodology thing.
Sure.
What kind of methodology, books, materials, whatever models would you recommend at the starting stage and at the stage that we have this 15-ish dev team plus a product person?
Yeah, for sure.
Plus we have, let's say, some funding.
Yeah. So the way that I would think about it, right, is so again, kind of splitting it to like pre-product market fit versus like post-product market fit. For pre-product market fit, right, kind of the founding team, they should be trying to bring in like something that I call the product mindset into everything that they're doing, right? And really, again, like the whole thing is based on what I mentioned before. Every company, its goal is to create value for customers and capture that value for the business, right? And so from that lens, right, when we have the product mindset, we cannot just say, this is the thing that I really want to see get built, right? Like we need to understand what is it that our customers are missing. And so part one is we need to understand which kinds of customers do we think we're solving for, right? And it's very different if we're solving for consumers versus businesses. It's very different if we're solving for engineers versus marketers, right? So we need to get very clear, who are we solving for? Because something that can happen is sometimes founders get so excited about their idea that they say, we're going to solve for everybody. Right? But the problem is when you're very early on, when you try to solve for everybody, you solve for nobody, right? Because you don't have enough critical mass to prove to someone, I can put out this really deep unsolved pain that you have, right? So you need to be able to narrow down to get enough critical mass to change someone's behavior, to get them to start to use your stuff instead of other people's stuff, right? And so if you just try to sell to everyone, it doesn't work, right? So part one is, which customer segment do we think we're going after and why do we think we're going after them? Like kind of, are they a large enough segment that we can earn money from? Do they actually care about these kinds of issues, et cetera, right? So we really want to focus on which customers. And then part two is, what problem do we think we're solving for them, right? Because many times we might think that we're solving some particular problem. And then when we talk to them, we find out that, oh, that's not actually the problem. Like there's actually a different related problem that seems very similar, but is actually very different, right? And so as an example, say that you're trying to implement like analytics for marketers. Maybe the problem is, hey, a marketer wants to have kind of all these different kind of cuts in terms of the dashboard. You talk to the marketer, right? And it's like, well, yeah, it'd be nice to have all these cuts in a dashboard. But actually the problem is when I talk to engineers, they say, it takes too long to build these dashboards. I'm not going to build it for you. And so I don't even have dashboards to begin with, like let alone being able to cut by these things. That's, okay. The pain is actually that it's too hard for engineers to give you dashboards instead of your dashboards not giving you kind of enough options, right? And so that is something that you need to dig in with your marketers to understand, right? Kind of that like customer segment. So we need to make sure, right? Again, kind of summarizing again, first, which customers, then what pain are we solving? Like, is this really the top pain? Is this something that they cannot move on with their lives unless like they get this problem solved? And then from there, the third part is, how do we think we're going to solve it, right? So this is where you start to think about, oh, well, I want like these different features and I want it to be positioned this way, et cetera. But we need to be thinking about return on investment, right? So we don't want to build this like huge, gigantic, amazing, visionary thing because it takes too long, right? Like if we take 2, 3, 5 years to build the perfect solution, our competitors will beat us with a okay solution, and then they will like dig into that pain a lot faster than we will, right? So using a return on investment perspective, what is the smallest amount that we can build to unlock the most value, right? So that's how you need to be thinking about, well, what is the solution? From there, the fourth point is, how do we know if we've succeeded, right? So we need to be able to measure that somehow. And by measure, I don't necessarily mean like analytics. Like even if it's just like a qualitative like feedback loop where like a customer emails you or like you talk to them after they use it, that's really important. Like you need to know, like, how do we know that we're successful, right? Kind of, do they use our product just once, but then like they get all these things done? Or like, is it something that they use every single day? Like, what does it mean for us to succeed? And then after that, then how are we going to keep improving after we've launched this thing, right? So kind of these 5 parts: which customer, what pain, what solution, what is success, and how do we improve? These 5 parts are the most important thing before we get to product market fit. And it's something that not just the founder should be thinking, right? The founder should be empowering their marketers, their sales team, their support team, their engineers to also think in this way, because all of us own the product very early on, right? So we need to think about customer, pain, solution, success, and improvement, like kind of these 5 pieces. So that's kind of like before product market fit. And that's like the most important part, right? Kind of, yes, there are all of these different methodologies in terms of, lean design sprints, right? In terms of like trying to figure this stuff out. But it's really more of that like initial mindset, rather than saying we're going to build some perfect thing that we think is going to be revolutionary and game changing. It's all about digging deep into what is the customer pain. And again, not just building what the customer says they want from a feature perspective, but ask, why does that feature help you? Like, what is the point of having that feature? And like digging deeper and deeper into that pain until you see, oh, okay, here are all the different customers that have the same kind of pain. We will figure out a way to solve for this pain. And it's not going to really look like what they asked for, but it will solve for that particular pain. So that's kind of pre-product market fit. In terms of like post-product market fit, right? Like we're trying to scale things. Something that can sometimes happen is very early on, right? Kind of, when we first brought in that very first product manager, they are proposing, right? Kind of, here are the different ways that we're going to be working together, right? Like here's how we're going to like validate the market. Here's how we're going to figure out design. Here's how we're going to implement. Here's how we're going to measure success. Something that can happen is product starts to have too much decision-making power when it comes to thinking about design and engineering. And that's actually very dangerous, because product managers, our jobs are to figure out, how do we maximize return on investment? Right? Kind of, how do we build the least possible to unlock the most value? But we're not necessarily experts when it comes to user experiences, or in terms of understanding user behaviors. And we may not be the best when it comes to understanding what are the different technologies out there, where are the bottlenecks in our dev process, et cetera. Right? And so as we kind of move into kind of having, let's say, 20-ish engineers, right? Kind of, and like hiring your first 1 or 2 designers, we need to start shifting away from the product managers kind of calling all the shots to actually having something that we call the product trio. So basically, product trio is something that Teresa Torres had talked about very early on, which is basically, you have a product manager, a design lead, and an engineering lead, and they're all going to be making decisions together, but they're going to be making these decisions from a very different perspective, right? So from a product perspective, we're trying to figure out viability, right? Kind of, what is the business case? How much do we think we can earn for whatever functionality? How much scope do we need to be able to take away competitive share, right? So that's what the product manager is focused on. The engineering lead, their job is to focus on feasibility, right? So we have all of these different ways in which we could write the code to make this magic work, right? But what is the path that makes sense? Should we build like very short and very ugly because we're just trying to iterate very quickly? Or do we know that we've gotten to some point where we need to abstract and scale, right? Like how should we be building these different things in a way that balances kind of short-term velocity with long-term growth, right? So that's going to be the engineer's perspective. And then from the design perspective, they own desirability. So what is that? We need to remember that every product, the goal is to change someone's behavior, right? Like the point is not to sell someone a product, right? It's to change their behavior. If they change their behavior, they get value from your product, and then they will pay you for it, right? So the designer, they need to figure out, how do we get someone to actually use our solution? Because everyone is doing something that's not your solution yet, right? Kind of, they have their own habits, they have their own kind of desires. And so we need to think about, well, how do we position our product in a way that they will understand and will want to use, right? And so these 3, kind of the product manager, the design lead, and the engineering lead, every time we say, okay, we know that this is the customer that we are solving for, this is the pain that we want to solve for. Now, when we think about solutions, we need to kind of work together to try to figure out what are the different ways that we could do stuff, right? We don't want the product manager to say, hey, design, I want you to give me kind of these 3 screens with like these 3 animations, right? Like then the designer is not bringing their expertise. And you don't want the product manager to say, hey, engineering, we want you to spin up like these, database tables with like these particular fields and like these API structures, right? Like the engineer better understands how that should work, right? And so we want to be able to delegate to them and let them be able to surface, well, hey, there are actually some problems with this approach, or hey, actually, if we do it this different way, we can solve for not just the one pain that you raised, product manager, but also this other pain that we believe our customers might have. Right? And so by partnering together that way in terms of this product trio, that is something that is particularly valuable kind of as we move towards like more of that maturity. So again, summarizing, because I've just said like a bunch of stuff. Early on, the whole point is the product mindset, right? So everyone should be thinking together, what customer are you solving for? What is the pain? Why do we think the solution that we're doing is like the best return on investment? How do we know that we succeeded and how will we improve? Like that's everyone pre-product market fit. Post-product market fit, many times the product manager has too much decision-making power, so they need to delegate and let people push back against them. Where design pushes back from a desirability perspective of how do we do things that are going to be even more attractive to our target customer? How do we know that this is the right target customer? How do we know that this is the right pain? And also let engineers push back in terms of, are we building too fast, right? Kind of, is this too hard coded? Is this too scrappy? Or are we building too slow? Like, are we trying to abstract things that don't need to be abstracted yet, right? So kind of that product trio is very important to have post-product market fit for the product manager, designer, and engineer to jointly work together to figure out what are we building.
There's also a myth about pivoting when
Sure.
founding startups.
Yeah.
So I think that the most important thing about pivoting is that to be prepared mentally for it. But
absolutely.
Shall we really be always prepared to pivot, or maybe after product market fit is achieved, we should rather dig deeper and deeper instead of pivoting?
Yeah, great question. So the valuable thing about pivoting, right, is that we say we're going to go after some new opportunity that is valuable, right? But if you're already working on an opportunity that is already valuable, right, then pivoting is a huge investment of resources because you're changing the customer that you're solving for, the pain that you're solving for, and the solution set that makes sense for kind of these two, right? And so that's something that we want to make sure that we're being careful about thinking through. So generally speaking, before we have product market fit, right? Like we just don't see that customers really want to buy our product, right? Like we don't see kind of like inbound, like people trying to buy our stuff and like giving us all of these feature requests without us asking, right? If we don't have that product market fit yet, then we should keep pivoting, right? So run these kind of very time-bound experiments of, we believe that for this customer and this pain, this solution might work, right? And like you don't write any code, you put like prototypes in front of people, you put up waiting lists and you see if people are going to like buy or pre-order, right? You keep pivoting up there. But once you have customers who are coming in and paying you money and saying, we will pay you even more money if you do like these kinds of things, or we'll use your product even more if you cover these kinds of pains. If you pivot away, you've lost kind of all of this customer validation and all this momentum that you've built up, right? And so there, what you want to do is you want to start to scale. You want to start to build that traction and really dig deep into this customer segment and really be able to solve for them. There's something that we think about in terms of product management called like the S curve, right? Where basically when you're first getting started, you're like it initially looks like it's exponential growth, right? So initially kind of you solve for customers and it's like very, very slow at the start. Like it's really, really painful. But then you hit some inflection point, and this is your product market fit, where suddenly you're growing super quick, right? And so you want to be able to hit that growth. But after that, you need to pivot again, because what happens is now you're starting to saturate the market. And so towards the top here, you start to lose the ability to continue to grow. And so that's when you start to need to look for adjacent markets, adjacent product market fit. And then that's when you start to become not just a one product organization, you become a product portfolio organization, right? A multi-product organization. So that's kind of how you want to grow, is at the very start, right? As you're trying to get that initial traction, you have to keep pivoting, right? Like you have to try to figure out, when do we have the right kind of solution where people are banging on our door to try to get our solution because it solves it for them so well? Then once we have that, we want to dig, right? We want to focus and we want to make sure that we extract kind of all that value there, that we provide all of that value to our customers. And then once we start to see growth slowing, we can't just rest on our laurels and say, okay, like we've captured this market. We need to think about, okay, well, what is the next market, and kind of start all of this over again. So that's how we should be thinking about pivoting.
So it's true, this, let's say, all the wisdom that the founder
It's true-ish. It depends. So yeah.
The founder is a person that's most adaptive to change all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So probably this is what this is what a founder should be best at.
Yeah, exactly.
Adapting to change. Speaking about hyper growth, you've had experience working for companies that hit this exponential growth that we all dream about when starting up. What are your main takeaways that you would like to share?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So you very much will know when you're like on the rocket ship, like you'll feel it where it's like, oh my gosh, there's so many things that we could be doing, that we should be doing, and like we can't get it done. Like we're trying to like do everything, right? And so it's very exciting, but it's also tiring, right? And so a couple of things that I want to call out in terms of like being able to manage this hypergrowth phase, both for you yourself personally, as well as like for your team professionally. One of the things that we want to make sure that we do is when we're like growing super quickly, we should make sure that we're being particularly open to our teammates kind of surfacing complaints, right? Because when we're like scaling so fast, right, many times it's like, oh, well, we need to launch this thing for a customer now. And like, oh, like this thing that we needed to do like 2 weeks ago, we didn't do, but we have to do all of this stuff. There's just like all of these different moving pieces, different teams might be building stuff that doesn't work with your stuff. And like, now you have to fix it. And so in terms of like this whole thing, it's important to set expectations to folks that like, hey, it's going to be really bumpy, right? Like we are growing super duper quickly, and just there will be things that don't feel comfortable, and we will all make mistakes, and that's okay. I still want you to complain to me, right? Like I still want you to bring up this feedback of like, where are the problems that we see? Because right, we don't want to silence you. We don't want to say that your pains aren't valid. They are valid. Some of these we can solve, right? So if you talk about, hey, this spec process is too slow, or like, hey, us trying to do like these different kinds of things doesn't make sense, right? Or like, hey, like these meetings don't work, or like, hey, like we need these other meetings, right? Raise those, because those are pretty easy to fix, right? And so raise kind of all the different things that are problems. And so like have the product person be able to think through, okay, what are things that we could viably fix very quickly in the short term? But if it's something that's like, really, really big long-term stuff, like, oh, like we need to hire, 100 customer support people and do all of these trainings and et cetera. It's like, that'd be nice, but we don't have the time for that, right? Like we're going to keep growing, and there's all these different things that are happening. Like we simply cannot do that. I think something that, people might say is, hey, every time we onboard a new engineer, we'd love if like, someone could walk them through all of these trainings and like show them all the customers that we're working with and all the use cases. It's like, that'd be ideal, yes, but we don't have the time for that. And so it's going to be very scrappy, right? And so what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're logging kind of all of these, concerns and pains in one place where you can see it, kind of everyone on the team can see it, so they know that you're taking it seriously. And you identify these ones we just can't touch right now, right? Like I've heard you, I get that it's painful, but we need to keep moving, right? Whereas there are other ones of like, hey, like this is actually something that we can change. We should change it. Let's change it. Right? And so that's how we want to kind of think about, working with our teammates is we're all trying to do our best. We don't want to like over fix a problem, because we're going to be growing so fast that there will be all these new problems. And like, if we try to overly fix one problem, that problem might not exist like 2 days from now, right? And so we just need to keep moving. But if they're like very small things that we could fix, right? Like we should fix that, right? So as an example, hey, we shipped all of this stuff, and like you, product manager, didn't remind kind of the rest of the company that like we hit this deadline and like we did all this cool stuff, and like I feel underappreciated. Appreciate them, right? Like put up like a Slack message or an email somewhere. That's very small, and you can do that, right? And so like that's kind of how you want to think about it. And so like it's very important to listen to people, because we're all doing all of these crazy things with all these different hats, right? Like you've got engineers who are also doing customer support and marketing, right? Like you have like, customer support people who are also doing product and analytics. Like you have everyone doing everything. It's going to be really messy. So you want to make sure that they can at least raise their complaints to you, so that you can hear them out as a human being and kind of help them through, but also make it clear that like there will be problems. Like this is not going to be smooth, because we're growing super fast in a way that we haven't grown before, right? So there's that. The second thing that's important is just to remember that as you're going through hypergrowth, right? Remember that your product is something that other people use, is something that like other people's lives are being changed by. And so we don't want to kind of lose our humanity and say like, let's pump this metric, right? Like I'm going to do kind of all these optimizations to move this metric, because kind of if we are too metric oriented, we start to forget what is the pain that we're trying to solve? And we kind of over-optimize for a metric that ultimately cuts off our long-term growth, right? So we want to make sure that we still understand what is the problem that we're trying to solve? Why does this problem matter, right? The metric helps us see how much we've solved the problem. But if we try to solve the metric, we've forgotten what the real problem is, right? So we want to make sure that we keep in mind there are other people on the side of our product that have all of these unsolved pains, right? Kind of how do we keep solving those pains instead of simply kind of doing all of these, optimizations, right? Or kind of, doing all of these different things to kind of like boost the metrics. And on top of that, by really remembering that there are people on the other side of our product, that's a really great way to be able to motivate our team through this hypergrowth phase, right? Like, hey, this other person, right? Like before they had our product, their life sucked, right? Like here are the different things that they could not do before. And it was really painful. They couldn't earn money, or like they stayed up at night worrying about stuff, or they couldn't pay the bills, whatever, right? They have our product now. They don't have these problems anymore. And so we should keep going because we can help even more people live better lives, right? So by being able to motivate people that way, they're a lot less, they'll still complain, and you should still have them complain about here are the things that like don't make sense about our process, but they're going to be very motivated to like keep pushing and keep helping people as much as they can, right? So kind of really orienting around solving customer pain. So it's like those are like kind of the two things that we really want to make sure we're thinking through in terms of hypergrowth. Is your teammates are your customers, so you need to listen to them and try to find ways to help them out, but also be very transparent of there are some things that we just simply cannot solve right now, and here's why we can't solve it. And I know it's painful. I'm so sorry we can't solve it, but we can't. But here are the smaller things that we can do. And so that's one thing, right? Like treat your own teammates as customers. And then remember that your customers are not just dollars, right? Like they're not just metrics, they're people. And so by understanding how did we change this one person's life and bringing that story back to your own team, you get them so much more excited to kind of push through and do even more than they thought was possible. So those are all really important in terms of hypergrowth.
Clement, thank you so much for this fantastic conversation and for your insights. And this really made me think quite deeply about a couple of things. I'm absolutely certain that it made our audience think too. The biggest takeaway I have from this conversation is that building a product within a startup is changing somebody's behavior.
Absolutely, yes.
And this influences basically everything else.
Yeah.
Let's say all other things come out of it. So this is
Exactly.
something that I really that really impressed me from what you said, and this is something that I wanted to underline at the end.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It's all about changing people's behavior for the better. That's the most important part about product, for sure.
Clement, thank you so much for having you, and hope this is not our last conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on the show. Super happy to be sharing insights. And yeah, thanks so much for the wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much for listening to Sherpa Search on Tech. If you have enjoyed the show, please subscribe to our show wherever you listen. Thanks again. The Sherpa Search on Tech podcast is a production of Sherpa Search, an executive search firm specializing in the tech industry, helping hire the right people for expert and managerial positions, and advising how to build and develop long-lasting, high-performing IT teams. If you would like to learn more, reach out to us at maciej.szczerba@sherpasearch.tech or visit our website sherpasearch.tech. See you next time.